Y'all were just there watching me get ready, weren't you? Welcome to Ask the Theologian today on this Tuesday. Glad you are here with us. Sorry about the late start there. Had a little technical difficulty, but we're up, we're running, we are on now today, ready to go. And very glad that you are as we take your biblical, theological, and worldview questions today. And have a good time with it from those of you who are listening on Worshipify or Randy White Ministries. If you have a question, you can just put your question in. If you have a question mark, it's going to say, do you want to submit as a question? You say yes, if you want to submit it as a question. And then YouTube, if you'll put the word question first, that'll help me. That gets it all over onto my side of the screen. Nathan's got this little thing that when you do that, I don't have to follow all the chats. It just sends over a question. Or, especially if you're watching, on the archives, go to askthetheologian.com where you don't have the live chats. Go to askthetheologian.com and use that Ask a Question button, and that will get it there. And got some questions waiting for us to go today, and I'm looking forward to that. Hey, a little bit of follow-up. Yesterday, I believe it was Valerie in Louisville, we had a question about the 10% or the tithe. And I looked up this old book on archive.org. Some of you remember that. It's called The Tithe by E.B. Stewart, 1901. We were trying to determine when the teaching of the tithe came about, the teaching as it is today in evangelicalism. Now, this does have a kind of a historical overview of the tithe. I obviously haven't read it all yet. It does take an evangelical approach. I was guessing the 40s. This does that 1901 or 1903, I forgot what it was. And he's got a little, in the introduction, a little thing in there that says, if every Christian would tithe, we could win the world for Christ in the next 100 years. So that's kind of the approach that he takes on that. Just thought I would do a little follow-up. It is kind of an interesting book, though, because it does go into some historical teachings about the tithe that's rather interesting. Okay, let's get into your questions today, and let's start with Shirley in Ridgecrest, California. And the question here, have you heard, what do you know about Thomas Ross? He will be in a Bible version debate with James White next month, and then Shirley says so much controversy with James White. Let's see. I don't know much about him. We're going to see if we can find, unfortunately, that's what I was afraid of, too many Thomas Rosses. It's like having a name like Randy White. You get mixed up with people that are not you. So I don't know much about Thomas Ross. I'll dig a little further and see if I can find that and come up with that. Now, however, let's talk about James White, no relation, even though he has the same haircut and the same name. No relation. He, Thomas Ross, will be in a Bible version debate with James White. I believe that James White is, I have not actually followed one of his debates that's going on there, but because he does a lot of these. But from what I can tell, little clips and pieces here and there, James White is anti-King James Version and a Calvinist. Do I have that right? And I think James White probably is academically inept, though he comes across as very scholarly. But the problem is there has been in academia, if you're an academic elite, like James White at least would present himself to be, then you have swallowed a bucket of garbage. You've been brainwashed. And so today, someone who comes with their academic credentials and they believe in their academic credentials, I would be very suspicious. Now, they will present it in a very convincing way. You know, here's all the evidence, all the evidence. This is all the parrots that have ever said this for years and years and years. Parrots have been saying this. And yet it's nothing but that. It's parrots. It's fluff. It doesn't stand, I don't think, the test of time. I think academia will come to be, buffoonery eventually when we come to see it. But even, this has always been the case, I think even at Harvard, they used to say at Harvard, they would tell the new students, I've heard this is legend, so maybe it's not true, but they would say at Harvard to the new students, 50% of what you learn here is not going to be true. And that, in a sense, is kind of a good thing that they recognize it. But I think what has happened is they quit recognizing it now. And now at the seminaries and at the colleges and the Ivy Leagues, they think they're teaching the truth rather than pursuing the truth. I think James White thinks he knows the truth, but I think there's a lot that he rejects and should not be rejected. Now, again, I'm no James White expert. I am no Thomas Ross expert, obviously, but I hope Thomas Ross does a good job against him because the little I know of James White, I've never found anything that helped me very much. Now, a couple of hyper-Calvinist. Thank you. I was thinking he was Calvinist. Hyper-Calvinist, yeah. Which to me says fake academic. Because you can't be a pursuer of truth and be a Calvinist. Because it just doesn't add up. The logic is lame. But academia, you can be a fake academic, which is what 90% of them are now. And boy, the academics get mad at me when I say this. But academia, I would say there are several fields of that there. Okay. Thanks, Shirley. I appreciate that. And let's talk about a little programming and technical issues here today. Because two things. One is that many of you probably got a text in the middle of the night from our ministry saying that we are about to begin broadcasting. I don't know if you all got up to tune on the television because you wanted to hit the new program, Wake Up with Randy. I'm sending a text here. We had some sort of electronic glitch that took place in the middle of the night, which caused us a few problems this morning. And I don't know what it was. We're broadcasting out. I see Nancy says she's having problems on both Worshipify and YouTube. So we'll see what's happening there. But anyway, we're sorry for the middle of the morning text. That was something that went awry. Now, also, we've been having static problems. We thought we had the static problems taken care of, but I'm noticing now a click. Are you hearing a click? That click is different from the static problem. So the good news is we don't have the static problem so far today. The bad news is we have a click. Okay. Sorry about that. That's all a programming note. We shall work on that and get going with it. Okay, let's move on in our questions today. Let's go to Chuck in Weatherford, Oklahoma. And we've got, Nancy says still static. Okay, we got to work on that. I'll get to Chuck's question in a moment. we found what we thought was the problem in a PVC pipe that actually didn't even have wiring in it, but some of the wiring was against the PVC pipe, and it was causing the static. And when we would touch the non-wired PVC pipe, we would end up with the static going on. And so thought we got all that fixed. But anyway, we're going to continue to work on all of that. Now, Chuck's question. Yeah, Edith says there is a clicking sound. Nancy says static. Sorry about that. Perhaps some problems on Worshipify. YouTube seems to be fine. I'm going to go with it, and we'll have a recording if nothing else. Chuck has a question. This came in yesterday or the day before. Why does the Bible not talk about eunuchs, and why was it not talked down about? Or, I read an article a couple of days ago that drew parallel from then to now to today's transgender movement. You've got obviously a few eunuchs in the Bible, but there is never a, what would you call it? It never talks down about it, as they would say in Western Oklahoma. There's never a condemnation of these eunuchs. And you can see that you've got some, you can see how you could make the parallel with today's transgender. Let's go to this article. This is a random article, so I'm not going to say that it's right. It's from the Biblical Archaeology Society. I just looked up as we were talking here, what's a biblical eunuch? Biblical Archaeology Society has some good stuff and some bad stuff, so we don't know which one this is. But here is a fairly recent article, 2022, what is a eunuch in the Bible. And let's Matthew 19, 11 and 12. I don't know what version he's using. Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs that have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs that have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. Now, again, eunuchs that have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. As I read the Torah, I don't see anything about that. As I read the Sermon on the Mount, I don't see anything about, mutilating yourself for the kingdom of heaven. So what is going on with this? Let's look at the article here just a little bit. This is Stephen J. Peterson. I'm not sure who he is, probably an academic. Should the above words of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew be taken literally? Is he saying that men who can should emasculate themselves? The initial question that prompted the controversial teaching about eunuchs in the Bible actually concerned marriage. Goes on, let's see here. What is a eunuch? In the Bible passage, is Jesus talking literally about castration or just metaphorically about celibacy? Stephen J. Peterson, the Georgia professor at some university, addresses this question in his Biblical Views column, Punch Thy Neighbor. Well, that's an interesting title anyway. He believes the passage should be taken literally, that Jesus is talking about castration. I'm going to assume that's what that talks about. This interpretation is as controversial and countercultural today as it would have been in the day of Jesus, a time saturated with masculine dominance and power. Oh, brother. In the Roman world, the fallow dominance castration would have set anyone apart. I hesitate to, that sounds like some feminist writing there, but I don't know. Oh, look, it's written by Megan Souter. So I said it was by Stephen J. Patterson, but that's the guy they were quoting. The author is actually Megan Souter. Just the wording of that seems to send out clues that, this would be a good thing for men not to be men. That would be better. I tell you what, Chuck, I think that us figuring out what a eunuch was in the Bible does that mean castration? And if so, why wouldn't it be condemned? Because God didn't make us castrated. And why wouldn't that be considered some sort of mutilation? At best, you could call it asceticism. And I'm going to use that word. I don't know if I'm using it right, so I'm going to define the way I'm using asceticism. And probably nobody would know it's right or not because we don't use that word very much. But asceticism is living almost a non-human kind of existence, getting rid of all human pleasures for some spiritual purpose. So an ascetic might live in a cave or in a very simple hovel. A monk, they don't have any of the pleasures of life. They eat a simple meal. They don't speak. They don't have fellowship. Whatever. So that doesn't sound biblical. It doesn't even sound like this is a requirement for the kingdom of God. But I agree with Scott. He says, I think making oneself a eunuch for the kingdom is about voluntary celibacy. Paul alluded to such. And Paul did say, I wish that, they could be such as I. And he was talking about in the days of the offer of the kingdom and such pressing needs there's not time to go home to the family. There needs to be a freedom there for those who are in that situation of Paul's day. And he's saying there are some benefits in that regard. But I think that it's worthy of looking at. I suspect that a eunuch in the Bible might have been a celibate. Let's look up. I'm trying to figure out what the word means, because an EU word means good. It's good something. And yet I'm not sure where the word comes from. I want to look at the etymology of it. Okay. Yeah, here, I've pulled the etymology right here from Oxford English Dictionary. Eunuchus, Latin word, Greek word, eunuchos. Eune is a bed, so this must not be the EU prefix right there. I could be wrong, but I think that it just is coincidental that it's EU. So eune is a bed, and ox is some sort of stem of ikine, which is to keep. So to keep the bed, basically, is what it means, to keep the bed. As it says here, let me go back to this, the literal sense is, let me get that right, the literal sense, having a hard time highlighting that, the literal sense is thus the bedchamber guard or attendant. Now, that again, that's the etymology of the word. We don't use the word that way. But could it be that the Bible just talks about a eunuch as the bedchamber guard or the attendant, something that royals would have? And maybe, of course, even in biblical days, when they had their, what would you say? They had the harem, and you got the guard to the harem to protect it. And so this perhaps was someone who was very devoted, very trustworthy, that here you can put a man with all these women and you don't have to worry about it. And later did that come to mean castration, but it didn't mean that in the Bible. I would suspect if we did a little bit of study, I would suspect we might be able to go there. I would go out working it. I think that eunuch as we understand it now would parallel more to the modern trans movement, which would be anathema to the scriptures. And therefore, I think we're misunderstanding eunuch. I think this is one of the cases of an anachronism. We're taking eunuch as it means today rather than eunuch as it meant then. Again, that's a little bit of guess. We'd have to dig into that further, but that would be an interesting linguistic study that we ought to take care of. And I appreciate that. Linda was asking if Shirley got her question answered, and the answer is yes. Very first question of the day we got to Shirley, but well, sort of answered. I didn't really totally answer the question. Let's go to Frank, our friend Frank Frank, why did I do this again? North Carolina. I'm going with North Carolina. I could be wrong. This has to do with, it actually came through on a Facebook post, and I decided to put it as a question here. And on the Facebook post, let's see if I can find it here. I had hooked up, oh look, I'll come back to it, Frank. When I went to Facebook, it popped up this thing here that now does not seem to be popping up. Now I got to find it. Where is it? It's going to be in the old stuff. Here we go. Well, I had my dates mixed up. I thought we started our Thursday night Bible study in 2011. That's when we started the ministry. But now that I'm thinking about it, we started as a radio ministry, and we did some radio ministry for a while. And then this was January 17th, 2013, 9 years ago. And I said right here, we had our first online Bible study tonight, a beta test to make sure the system worked well. Was glad to have coast-to-coast participation. There's a link to the record. I wonder if that link still works. Probably not. But there's the people that came. Okay, first one, little beta test, and so the second one might have been a little bit bigger. Who knows? But you know, that's we've grown a little bit. Now we got those little tags all over the world. Except that we don't use that same system anymore, so it doesn't tag them quite like that. But anyway, now to get back to Frank's question. So here's the post right here. I said, this was Sunday, I said, I made a couple of miniature chocolate meringue pies today. Hopefully they taste as good as they look. They did look good, and I think they tasted good too. I had these little cast iron things. You know, you make a whole pie, like what do a couple people do with it? 3, because my mother-in-law's with us. You can't eat that. So I made it into 2, and I gave one to Nathan and Whitney, and we kept one, and it was good. Anyway, Frank said, when do you have time to study? And then, how do you spend your time in study? That was his comment on Facebook. So, let me say that I just want to answer that question a little bit about how I spend my time in study and when I study. Because especially for preachers, but even for others, it's kind of, a curiosity question. When exactly do you study? I have learned to study, first of all, in small chunks. And so I'm able to take a little bit of study here, a little bit of study there, write it down, and get back to it. So here and there. I have also learned that at some times, like a Sunday afternoon, obviously, I need a time when I'm not studying. I'm just every time I do it, like I stop and make a chocolate pie, I'm thinking, I shouldn't be making chocolate pies. I got other things to do. Just lately, I don't know why, I just decided I want to learn how to make a pie crust and a meringue. I'm pretty good on the on the meringue now. That, I think, came out perfectly. I'm still working on the pie crust. I think it's a science thing. It's I don't know what got into me to make me think I got to make a pie crust that's better than grandma's, but whatever. But it's kind of a diversion. It's a mental diversion. I think people who study a lot need mental diversions. I think people who have a lot of mental diversions need to study. So I think the two things balance each other out. The gospel rightly divided, and I was talking about the gospel in the Gospels. It didn't take me all that long to put it together. I'm going to guess 2 to 3 hours to get it together, to get it written down, to get it, the outline uploaded, all that. I'm going to guess the 2 to 3 hours, probably more like 2. But the only reason is because I've been preaching for 30 years, and so I kind of, I've read the book of Matthew before, and Mark and Luke, and I've taught, verse by verse through John. I kind of know where these are going. I understand the basic principles. This is why, for a young preacher, by the way, let me say, make it your habit to preach the Word of God, preach and teach the Word of God a lot. If you do that, you will really open up your opportunities for ministry in the future, because you won't have to spend 6 or 7 or 8 hours of study on something, because you got 30 years of study on something. So that's part of it. I think, I'm not sure what Frank's career was. Perhaps he's told me before, but I think that whatever your career is, by the time you're 57, if you've been doing it since you were in your 20s, you could pretty much stop and lead a seminar on it. If you're a mechanic, then, and someone asks you a mechanic question, you don't really, if you've been doing it 30 years, you don't have to stop and go do some research and, you just, they say, I got a clicker in the liquor. Then you say, oh, well, here's the 4 things that it could be, and here's how we'll narrow it down. And boom, 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 you'll just be able to put that. That's the benefit of a lifelong of study. And I think that this is one of the things that seminaries don't teach very well, and modern Christendom even teaches it less. Because modern Christendom really says you need short sermons. Don't go over more than 20 minutes. That's all the mind can take, is 20 minutes. Even in their academic class, they say this when they got an hour-and-a-half class. The mind can only take 20 minutes. Never preach more than 20 minutes. Let me say this for an hour-and-a-half. Never go more than 20 minutes. It's tomfoolery is what it is. Because the mind can take more than that. But anyway, take it, study it. So my study time is typically Friday and Saturday. Well, I take that back. Wednesday, tomorrow, I will, after our program here, I'll kind of shift gears and I'll begin to study Hosea. And somewhere around 12:30, 1 o'clock, I'll be deep into Hosea, and I'll probably be there, because I don't know Hosea as much as some of the other books. I'll probably be there till 3:30. And then, if I get started late, just push that down, and I'll be ready to do it. But again, even though I don't know Hosea, and so I have to look up some of the specifics there, well, I know the divided kingdom, I know northern Israel, I know some of the kings, I know the time period, I know the setting. So when do I study? Over the last 30 years. That's when. And I think that's what preachers ought to do, is do that. Now, how do I spend my time in study is really what Frank's asking. And I scarcely use a commentary. I will use the companion Bible. I like the companion Bible because it gives some good cross-references that I can check, and it tells me if there's something unusual in that text. And that's what I want to know, is there something I'm missing? So I spend my time in study looking at cross-references and looking at word studies and cross-references, and that puts it together for me. Now, if I am doing an Old Testament book, I do like to go see what Jews have to say, just because I think it's kind of interesting. And a lot of times I will jump into a Jewish commentary. Only time I get Christian commentaries is to see what dumb things somebody talks about. Anyway, thank you very much. I agree with you, Nancy. I do use lard for my pie crust. I use lard. I think every home should always have a bucket of lard. But that's for another day. Let's go to a question from Janice, who says, I tried to send my question in the chat box, but since it's my first time, I wonder if I messed up. This is my backup plan. So she sent it by email. And it did mess up, whatever it was, it messed up. But I would tell you, I think the safest and securest thing is always askthetheologian.com and use the Ask a Question button when you get to Ask the Theologian. That's because it gives you a verification. Hey, it's been sent. And I get it not only here, but I also get it in my email. So that's my suggestion. But anyway, I almost finished with your Hebrews study, The Last Call for the Kingdom. It has greatly helped me. Thank you very much. It's been a few years since I did Last Call for the Kingdom, the book of Hebrews, but I don't think I'd change much. I think I would go with it. I purchased Understanding the Book of Hebrews at Dispensational Publishing. On page 140, the author says, it is the sovereign purpose of the Father to bring each and every believer to final glorification. The Father has decreed from before the creation that those he has chosen will become holy and blameless. This is the decree of the God and the Father, which cannot be thwarted by anyone, including the believer, or by anything. Now, Janice, after quoting that, says, sure sounds like Calvinism to me. What say you? I say that's Calvinism. And I would say doesn't fit my view of the book of Hebrews at all. As a matter of fact, I would say Understanding the book of Hebrews doesn't do that. And this brings me to a challenging situation that I'm a publisher. And I publish dispensational material. And I was a right divider when I began publishing, but I'm much more strongly a right divider today. And I got this publishing company. I really have had to determine, okay, I can't agree with everything or I would never print a book. And so we print books that I don't agree with. I have thought about a couple of things at Dispensational Publishing. Maybe y'all could help me know what to do here. I've thought about maybe when you go to Dispensational Publishing, you can choose your brand of dispensationalism because there is a lot of choices. For example, we have a good bit of our audience that is King James only. If it's not King James, they don't want to read it, and I respect that and understand very much their. In fact, honestly, I'll say more than I understand their position. I respect their position, and so should they have to go with? I don't remember Understanding the Book of Hebrews, which Bible version it uses, but it might be a NASB book or something like that. Should they have to look through this and then find out maybe after they ordered, that's not King James. I'm not even going to read it. That is one of the reasons, by the way, we always take returns with no charge. We even pay the postage to get it back. But wouldn't it be easier if they could click a button and say, here's the King James books? But even at that, within dispensationalism, there's I don't know what names to put to it. There's Schofield dispensationalism, there's Ryrie dispensationalism, and there's what pejoratively some people will call hyper-dispensationalism. Well, if you want mid-acts dispensationalism, shouldn't you be able to easily filter through and say that? But there are some people who, they think that's heresy, and they don't want to read that. But they would read Understanding the Book of Hebrews, and so click that. I haven't figured out, should I filter them from the beginning? Send you to this room, you liberals go over here, you crazies that don't know what you're talking about over here, and those of us who agree with me come over here. I've thought about that. Another thing I've thought about, this is a little more, a little less obvious, and the problem would be communicating it. But, like when you go to a restaurant and on the menu it has like a little, a little heart for the heart healthy stuff, or it has a little chili for the hot stuff, whatever it is. Maybe we could put little symbols, little tags, something like, I don't know. I need to do something there. So, yes, my apologies. We will refund the price of the book if you'd like us to. But thank you, Janice. I appreciate that. That just gets into, that's a problem. I've even thought about, let's have right division publishing, and let's have dispensational publishing. Let's go with it that way. Because, again, sadly, there's not a lot of communication between the two. There needs to be. But there's not. Appreciate that. Randy in Corsicana, Texas. Do you think Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were made eunuchs, a little bit of a follow-up, by the Babylonians, since it is implied they were under the prince of the eunuchs? And that, you're exactly right, is implied there, or how much is it stated? Let's just see. Let's go to Daniel 1:3. And it says, this is the third verse of Daniel, the king spoke to Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom there was no blemish, but well-favored and skillful in wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, by whom they might teach the learning of the tongue, and the king appointed them daily. And of these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's Daniel 1, chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. So you are exactly right that it is implied, if not, you could almost say stated, that they were under the prince of the eunuchs. So were they made eunuchs? As a matter of fact, it says in the next verse, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. To Daniel, Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, to Azariah, Abednego. Seems like the prince of the eunuchs here has a lot of authority. I don't think there's anything else in the book that would either confirm nor deny that these young men could have been made eunuchs in the modern sense of the term. And yet, and obviously I don't think we know anything about any spouses for any of them. And yet, you kind of wonder, even back up in verse 3, the king brings certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of princes. You would almost, it seems, I could be totally off here, seems you would almost want them to reproduce themselves. Let's get the best, and have their children. But again, that would just be implication. It doesn't really say that. So we need something to go by that gives us a little more to go by. Let's see if Rashi has anything to say about this. We'll go to Chabad, and let's go down. This one's interesting. When you're looking for Daniel, he's not in the prophets, he's in the scriptures. There's a reason behind that we won't go into today, but then we'll find Daniel, and we'll go to chapter 1. And let's first of all just see what word they use. Verse 3, the king said to Ashpenaz, his chief officer, to bring from the children. Okay, his chief officer. They don't have anything about eunuchs. Let's go down to verse 7, the chief officer. So what's up with that? Let me check some Hebrew here. If I can. We'll see if this is helpful to us. Here's the Hebrew. We're going right to left. He said, the king to Ashpenaz, commander of his court officials. So this word right here, even in the interlinear, they have not taken that word to be eunuch, which lends to our earlier idea that eunuch came to mean castrated in modern times, but that eunuch, as used in the King James, didn't mean that. That it meant the keeper of the bedchamber. Here's where even in this case they're men, all the servants are, all the king's court is here, and this is the guy that's in charge of it, which is very different than castration. So again, I'm going to go back to, I think we are misunderstanding the word, but let's get back here to this Jewish. This on the left side of your screen, it's a modern Jewish interpretation of the Hebrew words over on the right side of the screen. So his chief officer is what he's got here. Now let's go ahead and turn on the commentary and see if it says anything. No, it tells us the nobles are the dukes. Okay, that obviously is coming from that time. Let's go back to where the word comes in. 7. No, it doesn't say anything about that. So I would say they are. I would say that we are misunderstanding the word eunuch there. That we're taking a modern interpretation of the word eunuch, and that's not what it is. And that if we did some study, we would find that in 1611. Eunuch meant a keeper of the royal household, not castrated. So then that when you get into the New Testament, does it still mean the same thing? I would suspect that it has nothing to do with castration. But then you would have to say, okay, why did Jesus say, some people become eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom? Well, you wouldn't become a keeper of the household, the royal household, for that. But in that sense, then, could it be implied that they have fully devoted themselves to keeping the nation of Israel? And it's used in a metaphorical sense. Good thought. And here I see that. Cliff says, like a chamberlain of a city. That's British talk there. What in the world is a chamberlain of the city? But I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. Even though my city doesn't have a Chamberlain, but yes, I think that's what you're right. Scott says 2 Kings 20 verse 18 on eunuchs, and of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, thou shalt take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Okay, so this is. I may be catching the context here wrong, but I think this is a threat of what is going to happen if they don't repent. They shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So if you argue here, okay, this is Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and Daniel became eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Could you argue that without arguing that they had been castrated? I kind of suspect you could. And you could argue that they are going to become house guards, and that this is what you want: servants who protect the king's household or the king's affairs, the king's business, rather than any idea with castration there. Thanks, Randy and Chuck. It goes on a little earlier there through that. Let's do sometime a study of the English word eunuch, which obviously is a Greek word, it's a Latin word, it's an English word. And where does it come through that it came to mean castrated? We may be able to become dismissive of that and say, that's not what it meant then. And there are a number of words like that that means it, just for curiosity's sake, let's see what the New King James says. I won't put it up on your screen here so you don't have to look at it. But Daniel chapter 1, verse 3. The king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs. It uses eunuchs. Let's see what some of the modern translations say. NASB makes it officials. ESV says chief eunuch. NIV says court official. Again, here's my premise. You question the assumptions, and we would have to do that through a little bit of study. But my premise is, in 1611, the word meant court official. Somewhere, the word eunuch meant court official. Somewhere through time, the word eunuch has come to mean a castrated court official. But even like the NASB said, eunuch means castrated, and these guys aren't castrated, and so let's not use the word eunuch because of what the modern word means. Now, that is not, by the way, an argument that we should update the King James Version. It actually is an argument that we should update our thinking. We should do some research on words. We should understand that words have do take a change of meaning, and carry that through. Thank you. Many in San Antonio, according to many, if believing that many people will go to hell is believing that we have a small God, a big devil that God loses because few are saved, what do you say to something like this? Okay, yeah, so here it is. Some people say, hey, if you say a lot of people are going to go to hell, then they say, oh, so the devil wins. So you got a big devil who gets more people than God gets. I think the basis of that thinking is that the devil is in charge of hell. When actually, and let's define hell as the lake of fire. When actually the devil himself is going to be burning in hell. And there's going to be a lot of people watching him burn in hell. So that's not much of a victory for the devil. If the devil was the CEO of hell, and he was able to use people in hell however he wants to, and that hell was his kingdom, and he had the ability to make decisions to control his kingdom, to make it better, to make it worse, whatever, then I could say, okay, yeah, you're right. I guess we have a small God and a big devil. But when God says, I am going to offer a gift of salvation that will rescue people from a destiny in hell, but I'm big enough to say, you make your decision, that's a big God. And it's a God who, in the end, allows the free will of mankind. That's the kind of God I would want. I don't want a God who is so weak in his psyche that he says, well, I've got to have more than they have. So I'm going to elect the best of them and bring them in, or whatever manner they would go in. I think what you see in the scripture is a God who defeats the devil, and he defeats the devil ultimately by throwing him in the lake of fire, where he burns in torment forever. So with that, it kind of takes away that argument. So I would say, okay, what do you say to, well, hell is bigger and so the devil's bigger? I would say bad assumption. Question the assumptions. That's the assumption that the devil gets something out of this, and he doesn't. He's burning there with them, in torment with them, forever separated from any potential whatsoever, which makes, in the end, God the only victor out of that. Appreciate that. So I see Cliff says his real last name is Chamberlain, which makes me curious. Again, obviously I have heard the word, but we've been talking about eunuchs and court officials and all this, and Chamberlain is not an American word, as I kind of mentioned. It seems more regal than we would have here. So I am going to look it up. Here, I've got it on Oxford English Dictionary. A male personal attendant of a king or nobleman who waits on him in his bedchamber, rarely also a lady's maid. An officer responsible for the management of the household of the monarch, now chiefly historical. And among the Scots, a steward, chief steward or factory. Okay, so that is that's what we're kind of talking about in the court officials, Chamberlain. Yeah, I'm going to go with Chamberlain. I think you've got the good word there, Cliff Chamberlain. That's interesting. My real last name is Chamberlain. My dad's mom had too many kids, so his grandmother adopted him without legal papers. We never found out till about 20 years ago. So his name was never changed. But the family took the name. And then I guess the descendants, that's what's on their birth certificate, so that's their name. That's interesting. But yeah, Cliff Chamberlain does sound sophisticated. It might have a bit too much pomp, perhaps, for an American audience. I don't know about Canada. I suspect for a Canadian audience as well, but maybe not. Interesting. A question from Gerard in the Netherlands. Does the King of the Netherlands have a Chamberlain? This is what we'd like to know. The first letter of the Hebrew alphabet occurs 6 times in the first 7 words without vowel points. Aleph, 1,000 times. This is called the 4th layer of Hebrew scriptures, denoting overall the 7,000-year plan. Let me speak at this from both ways. So the numbers connected to the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daleth, are like Roman numerals. You know, you use the alphabet. If you don't use an Arabic system, which most of the world, of course, does now, but if you don't use an Arabic system, then you have to use a letter to represent a number. So it's not uncommon among languages, especially more historical languages, to use these particular letters. And often in ancient languages, you started with number 1 as the equivalent of our A, the first letter of the alphabet, and you went through, say, to 9, and then you added some things in there. The Latin system, Roman numerals, the Latin system, you used more of a... They didn't use the first letters because they wanted something that represented more in the sense of an abbreviation kind of thing. And so you got the Roman numerals, of course, and their system there that takes place. Now, obviously, in Hebrew, you've got the same thing with, we could use this number. Now, in the Bible, it's never written that way. And that's because we would always use the actual word for 1 instead of the letter that they sometimes use to represent 1. We still do it today a little bit. When you write a check, you know, you write the symbols that represent the number up in the box, but then you use the words and spell it out. Well, in the Bible, it's always the words. So we don't really have a biblical example of these numbers. With that, then, do we know when exactly these numbers came to be used? When did they start saying, let's use Aleph as the symbol for number 1? That could have been post-biblical. They could have always just written, you know, 1. I'm trying to think of the Hebrew word for 1, which it'll come to me in a moment. But so that is to say, the numbering system might be post-biblical. We don't really know. We know that the numbering system is not so much used in the Bible. We know that there's biblical numerology in the Bible, that there's significance to 1 and 2 and 3 and 12 and 7 and all the 39, whatever, the numbers that go through there. So when did this come about? That is to say, I don't want to take an anachronism like we've been talking about with eunuch today and say, well, eunuch means castrated, and therefore when I find eunuch in Daniel chapter 3, castrated. That would be taking something out of its time and reading it onto the scripture. So before I bought the argument, I would want to really do some investigation on when did the numbering of the Hebrew letters come about. There's one thing I would say. Second thing I would say, is this, in a sense, can you get a timing issue or an insightful interpretive issue out of the numbers, the time, the count of particular letters? As Gerard says, Aleph 6 times in 7 words. One of the things I would want to check, being the skeptic that I am, one of the things I would want to check, you only have, in Hebrew, I think it's 24 letters. We have 27, of course, in the English alphabet. In Hebrew, I think you only have 24 letters. So with that, what would be the normative or the default if we took 7 words of whatever length these are, and most Hebrew words are fairly short length. If we took 7 words at random and did it 10,000 times, what would the average occurrence of the letter Aleph be? And we might find out this is very average. Is it a statistical anomaly? That's what I want to know. Or is it, you could pick 7 letters, almost any page, 7 words, almost any page, and you'd come up with, about, on the average, 6 times. I don't know that. I would just want to investigate that to see. Because, again, if I find out it's nothing unusual at all to have 6 times to have aleph in 7 words. Nothing unusual at all. And then I would find out, and aleph as the letter 1 didn't come about until after the close of the Old Testament. Anyway, then I would say, I'm not sure I want to use this as some interpretive basis. But let's go on. Because the Masoretic text, which is what you see here behind me in this scroll, it is what we use for the basis. The Masoretes did take some significance in lettering. But that came about after the scriptures were closed as well. We don't have Masoretes in the Old Testament. So later on, they took a somewhat mystical meaning of letters and words. Are they right? Well, that's something we would want to investigate. I'm not willing to say they were wrong. But going on, you mentioned, this is the 4th layer of the Hebrew scriptures. There's the literal layer, I'm going to forget my layers here, but basically you go from the literal to, I'll call it the mystical, though that might not be the best word to use here, and various layers. I do think that you do have to dig a little bit in Hebrew. I think it is a very poetic language. And in poetry, you can't just take it. You all know that I'm a lover of Rudyard Kipling and his works. And one of the things I like about Kipling works is you read it and you think you got it, and then you read it again and you say, oh, I never saw that. How clever that was. Good poetry has a hidden message. So, Hebrew being a poetic language, the manner in which they choose the words, in which they even spell the words, some of these things, really can, I think, have a message that gives us some insight. Now, I would take, and the Jewish people would too, whatever the 4th layer is, has to be subservient to the 3rd layer, which has to be subservient to the 2nd layer, which has to be subservient to the 1st letter. So you can't get a message in the 4th layer that is not there in the first layer, or that is that the 1st layer, I shouldn't say that is not there. I should say that is contradicted. So these messages have to align. One can go deeper than another, but they can't be contradicted in there. So all of that to say is, I think it's interesting. Would I build my 7,000-year plan off that? If I was going to have a 7,000-year plan, I think I would use that as supplemental. As supplemental, yeah, I can see how it could come in and could be of benefit there. Well, to all of the chamberlains in the room and all the chatting going on, I'm going to have to catch up on the chatting because I missed some of that. Good to see you. I am out of time, overtime here today. But we'll be back all week. Look forward to that. I got room for some questions tomorrow. Got a few in the hopper still, but I got room for some questions, and you can submit those at askthetheologian.com. Just use that question button, and we'll be happy to take care of it. Tomorrow we'll have the book of Hosea. Wednesday we'll have the book of Romans, and all week we'll have Ask the Theologian. Good to see you here today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. God bless.